Hey everybody, welcome to D3 Reads. In 2023, fantasy and science fiction book sales totaled nearly $600 million in the United States alone. And with science fiction, arguably one of the most exciting of the subgenres is military science fiction. It can be as brainy and thought-provoking as general sci-fi, but you're guaranteed lots of action. Today, we're going to talk about some of the best, most exciting military sci-fi books out there. And one of these books is in the top 10 best-selling sci-fi books of all time. Please join the conversation. So guys, I have been on a military sci-fi reading bender over the last 4 weeks or so. Now, when you think about it, military science fiction by its nature is provocative. I mean, in the real world, war is ugly, war is not glamorous, and at first glance, it seems like this is a subgenre that glorifies war. But I'd argue that's often not the case. Science fiction in general has baked into it criticisms of culture, of society, and of conflict. I mean, if you read Asimov, if you read Frank Herbert, if you read Heinlein, you see that these types of criticisms are woven throughout the storyline, and conflict is a natural part of it. Military science fiction, more often than not, I think, is quite introspective and philosophical about the nature of war and the effect it has on people. But you know what? We're not really going to talk too much about that level of detail. We're not going to do the heavy lifting kind of analysis on this. Frankly, it takes too long. But as I thought about the content of today's video, I did decide to take a look at, for the books that we're going to cover, I've got what I think are 5 of the best classic military sci-fi books ever written. They serve as inspiration for military science fiction books that we read to this day. I decided to take a look for which authors of these books actually served in the military. It doesn't mean that is a plus or minus against it, but what it does do is it makes you think about what they're trying to say, maybe on a different level. And as you may not be surprised, a number of the authors of the books that we're going to cover did serve in the military, but some didn't. And what I was really surprised to find, especially as a military veteran myself, that my favorite book in this collection was not written by someone who served in the military. But we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Before we get started, I want to throw out there a couple of honorable mentions. Number 1, Dune. Dune is such an expansive story. It covers religion, it covers politics, it covers war, definitely war, that I don't think you can really peg it to one kind of subgenre. I think it covers too much. So I didn't feel comfortable calling it a military science fiction story, though when you read it, I mean, the Freeman versus the Sardaukar, the conflict between the great houses, everything about it. Obviously, war is a huge part of it. So when it comes to military science fiction, Dune, I think, deserves a nod. But let's go ahead and dive into it. Now, I rank these from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but believe me, all of these deserve your attention if you're into this type of subgenre. Forever War by John Haldeman. John Haldeman is a military veteran. He served in Vietnam. He was drafted. He was a combat engineer. He got a Purple Heart, and he apparently had a hard time adjusting when he came back to the United States after the war. But he was able to channel some of that isolation and struggle into his work. And one of the books he wound up writing was this book, The Forever War. The main character of The Forever War starts off as a Private William Mandela. This has got a really intriguing concept behind it. So he's part of a military force that is being sent out to engage an alien race called the Taurans. Now, that's not what they call themselves. Frankly, these two races have kind of collided in space and have been fighting a war with each other, though it doesn't seem like either know what the other one's really up to. But in order to get to the areas where they're fighting, the protagonists and the military forces involved have to use something called a collapsar. And the collapsar is kind of a Stargate kind of thing that propels our forces kind of like a wormhole into the area that they're going to fight. But the neat thing here is, and where the Forever War gets its name, is while the soldiers who are involved in the fighting, they're aging normally, just like you kind of saw in the movie Interstellar. Time tracks differently as they're passing through these dense gravity fields or whatever it is that the collapsar represents. And so over the course of 9 months, 9 years will have passed back on Earth. And what we find is that through a series of events, Mandela ends up serving several hundred years in the military. But it's not all combat. Some of it's pretty intriguing, but the protagonist finds himself at various times back on Earth or back in civilization, and he finds himself completely unable to identify with the society that he's left. And I think that was really a big piece of what Haldeman was trying to convey here, is the effect that war has on soldiers. And in this case, he uses time to make those make that cultural change more, explicit. But that's a tool, I think, that he uses to talk about how out of place a soldier can feel once he or she returns back from combat. So really neat premise. Forever War was an inspiration for some of the other books that we're going to talk about here shortly. But I really enjoyed it. Definitely I thought the character was really relatable. The military scenes and the fighting were intense. The guilt that he felt, that the main character felt for fighting people who he didn't really even understand, comes out as well. So this really does a good job of making war a little bit less cool and a little bit more thoughtful. Number 4, John Scalzi's Old Man's War, published in 2005. Now, John Scalzi himself is not a military veteran, but he produced a pretty impressive book here. This has got a really cool premise. So this is sometime in Earth's future. And what happens is when you turn 75, you're able to enlist into the military, to the Colonial Defense Forces. And this is how it works. You figure 75 years old, you had a good full life, you're going to be dead in the next 10 years anyway, right? But if you enlist into the military, they will give you somehow, and they tell you eventually, a new body, a body that's specially designed and intended for combat. Catch is this: if you survive up to the 10-year enlistment period, they put you into another body, which allows you to live out a new life on a colony somewhere out in the universe. But the odds are that you're not going to live for 10 years, because the combat with the alien forces out there is so intense that they say, yeah, you'll probably die. Now remember, you're going to die anyway if you kept your old body, so why not go out in a blaze of glory? And if you don't end up dying, well, then you get a second chance at life in a new, younger body. You can live from that point on. So really, really cool idea. So in this case, the main character, a guy by the name of John Perry, his wife had passed away, and he joins the Colonial Defense Forces, makes new friends, gets his new body, finds himself primed and ready for combat. Fights a number of different races. Turns out the universe is just teeming with different races who are out there fighting each other, and each conflict is different because each race is different. They take tactics differently. Their strengths and their weaknesses are very completely different. Sometimes the military forces, the Colonial Defense Forces doing the fighting, they have no idea what their strengths are, and so they have to adapt, and that's why the casualty rate is so high amongst the CDF. So in this respect, there's a lot of action, a lot of really intense scening. A lot of people die. You don't get attached to too many of the other characters in here. John Perry is an interesting character. I liked him. I got a little annoyed with the fact that things seem to be so easy for him as far as figuring some things out. He's not not any more brilliant or capable than the other soldiers, but he winds up figuring some things out throughout this, which seemed a little too easy. But aside from that, it draws you in. He does make one mistake where I'm going to call this out, and most military veterans see this in movies and shows all the time. But he kind of fumbles, I think, in that. And this is a minor thing. Don't get me wrong, this is a minor thing. But he has enlisted guys saluting each other. You don't do that. No military does. Now, it's possible that in his world, this is what happened, but he doesn't explain it that way. Matter of fact, during basic training, they draw some similarities with modern military forces that would definitely suggest that saluting each other just shouldn't be happening. So that kind of got on my nerves a little bit. But let's set that aside. Minor thing, just sticks out. But overall, the story is really good. It spawned, I think, 5 additional sequels after this. So the books I haven't read those yet, but I will definitely be visiting sometime in the future. Old Man's War, definitely one of the best military sci-fi books you can read. Number 3, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Again, Orson Scott Card, he was not a military veteran, but he ends up writing this book that is so well received that it was actually on the Marine Corps suggested reading list for junior enlisted and junior officers for a period. I don't know if it still is, but it was at one point. It is a bestseller. Matter of fact, it was on the list of best-selling sci-fi books of all time, number 5, according to wordsrated.com. So it is an extremely popular book, spawned a movie version starring Harrison Ford. And in Ender's Game, there's a war going on between Earth and a race called the Formics. They're an insectine race. And you're going to see this. Bugs show up an awful lot in military sci-fi. I think it's just the alien nature of insects just lends itself easily to human imagination as far as what an alien race would look like. But Earth's international forces are in a war with these insect Formics. They've already fought twice, and they're expecting a third engagement sometime. I think it's the gulf between the galaxies that causes the delays between the fighting. And so in preparation for this inevitable war, the Earth basically identifies its highly exceptional children and starts grooming them from that early age to be military fighters and generals. And in this case, Ender Wiggin, his name's Andrew, but they call him Ender, is identified as an exceptional youth. Matter of fact, they bring these kids in young. This is like 9 years old, I think, when he's brought into what's called the battle school. And the battle school is just really cool. Imagine this orbital kind of planet, facility where the protagonists and the children who are brought into the battle school, they're brought together and they have to fight each other in squads and in progressively larger units, and they're in the zero gravity kind of thing. And Orson Scott Card does this really cool job of explaining this. Now, I'm not going to spoil it, but the challenges that Ender faces ultimately result in what I thought it was a very well done surprise. So if you've seen the movie, I may have already given it away for you, but definitely worth your time to read this book. It transitions, before you even know it, from tactics to strategy, and it becomes pretty deep. This book has been criticized because of its use of gratuitous violence in there. Ender does some pretty nasty things. There have been some accusations of Hitler worship or something. I don't know, but I don't think that was Card's intention. Ender recognizes the violent nature of some of the stuff he does. He feels terrible about it, and ultimately he shows empathy with with Earth's enemies. So very well done book. There's also some additional plot going on with his brother and his sister and politics on Earth and things. So it's a deep book. It's enjoyable and engaging, and definitely has a place on any list of the best military science fiction out there. Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. Now, a lot of folks, I think, will put this as number 1 because, in a way, this was like the grandfather of almost all military science fiction. And it certainly deserves to be among the top. If you've only seen the movie, then you definitely need to read the book because they're very, very different. What the movie gets right is that Starship Troopers is set in a future Earth where the citizenry, where the government structure, the political structure is completely different in that world than it is today. Democracy, it had its chance, it fell. You still have yourself something of a republican system, but in this case, there's 2 types of citizen. You basically have full citizens and you have the legal residents. Most people are not full citizens. Most people do not get to vote. The only way you can vote is if you serve your time in the military. Once you've served your time and been discharged, then you're allowed to vote. And that is like the big draw to get into the military. If you want to be able to vote, you have to serve. Well, there's a lot of philosophy baked into this, and it's not necessarily really what is considered to be ideal for real. The main characters seem to believe it. But again, we're not going to get into the deep parts of this that Starship Troopers comes in about. Part is the glorification of war. Interestingly, the movie Starship Troopers was clear that it was critical of the whole military-industrial complex and the military mindset, and how easy it is to think of yourself as the good guy when you may not necessarily be the good guy. I don't think that the book version of this was quite on that same wavelength, though there is some of that in there. But what it's but what happens is that a lot of the movie seems to pull from, say, Old Man's War and Forever War, and not from Starship. Starship Troopers, the mobile infantry, they are basically the same type of infantry as we have today in the Marines today, and that kind of thing, because there's no co-ed military like there is in the movie. That came straight probably from Old Man's War and Forever War, where they have that kind of thing. But here you have a mobile infantry, and their job is to fight. And though they do have the inter-service rivalries, it wasn't quite as distinct as what you saw in the movie. But Starship Troopers, really, it follows Johnny Rico through his enlistment, through his training, through his first drops, and then his evolution into a soldier. And it's actually there's a lot to it that rings true just to someone who's been in the military. The esprit de corps and the sense of identity that comes from being part of a special unit that the other folks, you either can't identify with them, or maybe you view with suspicion. There's a lot to that, and I personally felt that part was very well done. I kind of felt like the story got a little bogged down with that minutia, with his observations on training and leadership and things like that. It kind of felt like that he was, I think, digging in a little bit in there. Heinlein did serve in the military. He was in the Navy. I think he got medically discharged or something like that. But after, I think, 6 years or something. But Starship Troopers, is kind of like the grandfather of it all. You're fighting the bugs. The fight scenes are pretty intense. The ending, I think, was worthy of a good military sci-fi, and just the promise of future combat as the book closes. I think it does really good. It's a satisfying story arc for Johnny. You see him grow and you see him develop into the hero of the story. So Starship Troopers, I think, definitely deserves to be towards the top of the list, but it wasn't my favorite. The number one book here is written by someone who never served. It's Armor by John Steakley. Armor was published in 1984, and it was just high speed. I loved this book. It has a lot of similarities with some of the other books. They're fighting bugs, in this case ants. They have high tech. The main character, Felix, has high tech armor. In this case, he's a scout, so his armor is a little lighter, a little bit more mobile, not quite as powerful, but still really powerful. But it's a really complex story. It changes. You start off observing Felix as he first becomes a scout on his first drop onto this planet called Banshee. That you don't really get a clear idea on why they're really fighting over it, other than the enemy is there. The ants that they're fighting are they're 2 meters tall. 2 or 3 meters tall, and 3 meters tall. The ants they're fighting are 3 meters tall. Some of them have blasters, some of them don't. They fight with their pinchers, and there's just like ants on Earth. There are just so many of them, and they just can never. You just get the overwhelming sense of, why are we here? The enemy's not going away, and you really sympathize with Felix and the struggles that he has. He sees his friends come and go. He's becomes more and more withdrawn throughout his experience there. But then the story transitions over to another story several years in the future with a man by the name of Jack Crow. And Jack Crow is essentially a pirate. And I was a little thrown at first when the transition happened. Like, where's Felix? What's going on? But John Steakley does a really good job of bringing this story full circle. So I'm not going to go too much into that because I don't want to give it away, because there's some surprises here. This is the only book that there are parts of it that I literally said, "Oh, no way." I mean, it was so enjoyable. The action was great. The sci-fi was top notch. The experience of Felix really resonated with me. It's interesting that he does a really good job of contrasting both patriotism and sense of duty and disillusionment and all these things amongst civilians and military folks alike. You can see that not everybody's talking on the same wavelength. Some civilians just in awe of Felix's bravery, but then they kind of resent him because he just won't die. You'll understand when you read it. So anyway, Armor was my favorite of all these. I think it was I think it deserves its place at the top. But what do you think? If you've read these, do you think Armor is the best? Which one, or if not, which one would you put at the top? And if I missed something that you thought should be on a best of list for military science fiction, please let me know. Drop a comment, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and please share this. Our community is growing. We finally hit over 100 subscribers, and I can't be more thrilled. Thank you all so much for your time. Please continue the conversation in the comments, and see you again next time.